Welcome to week 10, everyone. Thanks for a great week 9 of conversation about a really demanding passage. I was impressed also with how well so many of you digested those long but dramatic chapters by Josephus. And I I resonate a lot with how many of you lamented the fact that this this complex event of civil war among the Jewish community and then Roman invasion that happened before Jesus's generation passed away has not really been a part of the living memory or teaching of the gospel story in our churches. And I think that's a big mistake. So I hope that we'll find wise ways to recover the memory of that uh, culmination of Jesus's generation and reflect on how we have inherited our world from those events in a variety of ways, and also been taught by Jesus through his disciples how to face intergenerational upheaval ourselves, and especially perhaps to learn not to let our love grow cold when the times may leave us jaded and cynical about what is possible, about what's worth living for. So thanks for that. Really good conversation this past week, I thought. And we are nearing the end of our journey through Matthew. This week, we're going to be studying chapters 26 and 27 in the narrative together, which are the scenes of Jesus's final meal with his disciples at Passover. That's after he's been anointed, after one of his disciples has plotted to or joined a plot to have Jesus arrested and killed. And that betrayal of Jesus is actually the framing of that Passover meal in a way that I don't think that we have appreciated, even in our liturgy today of communion or the Lord's Supper, Eucharist, whatever you call that in your tradition. And so I hope that is one piece of the story that we will chew on and ask what Jesus is giving his body and blood to someone who is betraying him means about the power of his death. And of course, Judas was not alone in what he did, but was joined by the other disciples in a variety of ways who deserted Jesus instead of standing by him and denied him. And Jesus loved them anyway, even without condoning their unfaithfulness, but still persevering with them, loving them through their failures. And I think that says a lot about the nature of his death. Anyway, from those scenes, Jesus, of course, in Gethsemane, arrested there. Lots to think about in terms of the way that he is framed for his arrest, and then the various trials that he faces, and how he is revealed as the judge by the way that he is judged by others. And that, of course, continues through his trial before Pilate, or at least an interrogation by Pilate, his public condemnation by crowds that are whipped into a fury of violence by their authorities, and then his crucifixion and the apocalypse that is involved in the way that Jesus dies. I have purposefully stopped our study there in my planning for the course because I feel that in the Christian tradition, we rush too quickly to the empty tomb and the accounts of Jesus's appearances as risen from among the dead and what that means. We don't sit long enough, I don't think, with the horror of Jesus's death and how that horror actually anticipates the way that a seed anticipates a tree, the horror that is coming to Jesus's generation and will finally consume the city of Jerusalem in flames. That means that we have got to sit with something that feels like it needs resolution. And I hope this week, as you study the text of Scripture and listen to the podcast, that you'll be patient with the unfinished and frankly horrifying quality of the narrative here, and to allow that to form us in ways that it is designed to. Then after the pause of the end of this week, we will study the closing scenes of the narrative in chapter 28 together. And next week, week 11, the last week of the course. And probably still come away, I think, as we should, with a sense that the story is incomplete because it is told for us to receive it as a calling that we are to complete and pass along to complete to others ourselves. The presence, the rule, the power of Jesus is to be expressed, extended, developed by people who are baptized into his triune name and learning all that he commanded through his disciples. So even next week will probably feel a little unfinished, but I think that is by design. The work that you have on your plate this week is, of course, not just studying the text of Matthew, but finishing your advanced interpretive papers, reviewing your partner's paper as you do. I hope that as you review your partner's paper, you'll not just take into account the criteria that I've asked you to use for that review, but also try to just think about the nature, the goal of the assignment, and to encourage one another in pursuit of that. We're looking for a way of interpreting the Bible that hopefully learns from the skill that this class has been trying to inculcate in you. That's going to give you some sensitivity to the narrative drama, some of the particulars and even technical aspects of the text, but not in such a way that is going to rob the passage of its gospel quality. Not in a way that's going to keep, hopefully, your paper from preaching, from being an expression of good news. And so I hope that you'll encourage one another in those peer reviews in trying to sort of develop your voice as the writer, the preacher, the proclaimer of this story. And any analysis, detailed consideration of the text should keep that in mind and not forget that purpose of our study of this text of Matthew's gospel. So I hope that that is something that will be reflected in your comments that you give to one another. And do remember, some of you have asked me again, I mentioned this last week in the video, but I'll reiterate it here, that there really should be some added development between your working paper and your advanced paper. I've just given you some examples of how that is added development, namely that this paper is designed to preach more than the working paper would have. It has a more finished quality, a more polished argument, a fuller defense of the interpretation that you are articulating in the paper. That doesn't mean that you can't have any sentences from your working paper that appear verbatim in your advanced paper. I don't think there should be too much of that, but it's okay if here and there something like that happens. It should just be clear that you have been able to move your interpretation from what you did in your working paper to the next level of development, even if you retain some of the words that you wrote from your working paper. So looking forward to the conversation again this week, both on Canvas and in some video conferences. And I'll just be anxious to see what you all come up with in your engagement with the really climactic part of this story, with the way that Jesus goes to his death.